Well, Sunday marked the beginning of Child Protection Week. Social Development Minister Susan Shabangu led the campaign's launch in Pretoria.
The Child Protection Week campaign was initiated in 1997 to raise awareness about the need for communities to protect children from abuse and other forms of violence. This year's theme is "Let us protect all children to move South Africa forward." All right, well, joining us in the studio then is Deputy Minister of Social Development, Hendrietta Bogopane Zulu, and she's here with us. Thank you very much for joining us, Deputy Minister. As you can see, we've now got our green brochures here in awareness of the week of Child Protection Week, and we do appreciate you coming into the studio so bright and early in the morning. All right, so Deputy Minister, I mean, it's all good and well to launch these kinds of initiatives, to have Child Protection Week as we've had over the years. But, you know, realistically, on the ground, here we are. We're dealing with kidnappings and murders of South African children almost on a weekly basis. There's a big story about a child who's either been kidnapped, who's either been killed, who's either been raped, or all of the above. What's being done on the ground, really, to protect our children?
Thank you very much for having us, and good morning to your viewers. I think it's important for all of us to first ask the question of what happened to community, what happened to the village, what happened to the family, what happened to the relationship between adults and children. And that is where we need to start. We have all the legislative frameworks in place, but they are there to declare order. But if we as South Africans are actually becoming a community where we are unable to protect children, then it means government must now start to regulate people's private lives. We must regulate people's homes. We must now start deciding what are you going to eat for dinner. And that is literally where we are. But you also cannot talk about child protection without talking about gender-based violence, because the two are very related. Children grow up in very violent families. So before you talk about the child having exposure to violence in the community, at school, the child already experiences violence in the home.
Now, Minister, I mean, we talk about Child Protection Week, and I want to know, what are the events sort of planned for this week as we enter? We're starting today, we've got our green brochures and all of that, but what have you planned for this week to highlight the problem areas where children are facing, realistically, abuse and all of that we're facing?
We started with a round table because we are signatories to the UN Convention, and Article 12 requires us that we need to ensure that we have the voices of children. So we started the week with a roundtable where we needed to listen to the voices of children, because we are busy reviewing the plan of action on child protection. So we needed to ensure that children are able to actually outline. All the provinces will be launching their activities. So Child Protection Week, for us at National, we open the week and we close it, and we give provinces as the implementing entities and municipalities the responsibility to ensure that they are able to go down into their communities at ward level. And I can confirm all provinces have activities at different dates from province, district, and local municipalities.
Honourable Minister, thank you for joining us. Your subject matter is so broad. I want to dig into it and make it more specific. I understand that education is the first line of defense, right? Could you unpack the details that are being rendered out to our communities in terms of education, about child protection?
I think the first defense is family. Education in terms of raising awareness on issues that deemed that at that point you're no longer protecting child. You are actually crossing particular lines. We're doing that as social development. Part of why we are forever out in doing community, we run dialogues literally every day. We're implementing positive parenting programs, but we're also implementing strengthening of families, because from where we are, we believe that strengthened families are able to withstand all the social ills. And right now, we are seeing, like Florence said, children are kidnapped, children are raped, it all starts in the family. If we can sort out the family and we make sure that the family functions, we will be able to reach a particular point where we are able to protect our children.
I mean, I know that you said that it's families really that should be protecting the children, and I think I heard a quote where you were saying, just in anticipation of this week, you said something like, and I'd like to quote you correctly, that children are not born of government, and correct, that is true, but the fact of the matter is that we have many children who actually don't have their parents, and as you mentioned, there is this abuse issue. So some don't even have their mothers, some don't have their fathers. And this is one of the quotations that you made. And I remember very well Nelson Mandela making the quote that there can be no keener revelation of society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. Is the department following that line of thinking? The fact that, how its children are being treated, how its children are being maintained in the society, how government treats its own younger citizens, the citizens that can't help themselves, that can't defend themselves. Is government following that train of thought that, that is a revelation of a society, is really how primarily even the government treats its children?
Government remains, the Department of Social Development remains the guardian of all children. That's where we start. But society takes the first responsibility. That is why when we grew up, it used to say, it takes a village to raise a child. Today, we're moving into nuclear families. We're moving into high-walled. The more we try to secure the children, the more we actually isolate them. Yeah. But also we acknowledge, that is why we've launched the ECBND program, where we're no longer putting children in orphanages, but rather we try and firstly protect their inheritance by keeping them in their original communities so that they are able to live there, but also protecting siblings because our foster care system separates siblings. So at the moment, there is a lot that we are doing, but we are also looking at the Guardian Fund. And we want to make a call as we do the Child Protection Week to parents also as they prepare and plan. Please do wills because it does also make children vulnerable. Yeah. And that is part of what we will also be focusing on this week, is that the Guardian Fund has a lot of billions and billions of money that is supposed to be assisting us to protect children, to fight poverty. But because parents did not plan for their children, and we now need to sit and fight with the court before the children could be looked after. So the issue of child protection is a very broad issue. There's a lot of issues that you need to deal with. This week, we are focusing on the school, as you rightfully said, yeah, in terms of education. Today and until Wednesday, tomorrow, we are in Lepalale, where we are actually launching a computer lab that is fully functional for deaf learners. Because deaf learners, as we know, not all of us know sign language, we have made sure that all our call centers are now connected to enable deaf people to report violence against them. Good. So we're now empowering children in special schools to also be able to have a voice. That is why we're bringing ICTs in the space of child protection.
Deputy Minister, you raised this quote that, it's an old quote and one that I've been actually quite concerned about, especially as society changes and things change and sometimes not for the better. You said it takes a village. Now, when we say that, and I know in the times when I was growing up, that did make sense, and we'd often, you could stay at a neighbor's house and, your neighbor would look out for you and all of that. Things have changed, and what I've noticed in some of these news reports where you hear that a child has been abused and so forth, it's sometimes the people that they know around them in their neighborhoods. So families have had to sort of go, well, we can't trust our neighbors, we can't trust the uncles, we can't trust all of that. We need to adapt these kinds of sayings. So I'm saying, is government not going to take a harder stance on protecting its children? We cannot give it to the village. It's no longer a case of it takes a village to raise a child anymore, because the very same people that we're putting this on are the very same people in some instances who are abusing and murdering these children.
It depends on how you define a village, because the definition of a village, it's literally where you live. And we must all understand that children are no longer safe in their own parents' houses. They are no longer safe in our orphanages. They're no longer safe. So when we say we need to go back and look at the village, we do that conscious of the fact that the definition of the village has now changed. The people that make the village, their characteristics have changed. But the intention and that which the village represented has not changed. We are amending the Children's Act, for an example, to make sure that we are able to bring back Section 39 on abolishing the spanking and beating of children in the home. But once you go that route as government, you also taking away the little responsibilities a family should have. So part of what we are doing, we launched a perpetrator register, because we believe that until we strengthen perpetrators and invest time and energy and programs to actually rehabilitate them, we will run out of what we can do.
Yes.
So the very uncles, are also being taught and participating in the positive parenting programs. But our child protection programs, we are now starting them at early childhood development. Right at the age of 2, we are beginning to teach children on what is it that is not okay, how I'm not supposed to be talked to, how I'm not supposed to be touched, because sometimes it is now the fathers that gave birth to these children that are now abusing them. So in response to that, we have developed an ECD program. We are improving our diversion programs, but also we are rolling out the strengthening of families. And the elements of the strengthening of families, it's more than what we used to do. It's about assessments. In the past, we would assess people that work in our institutions and not necessarily assess families. But now, with this scourge, we are even going to assess parents to say, are you a suitable, qualified parent? And the environment that you are in, and the people that form the village, from the gardener to the housekeeper, to the neighbor, to the teacher, to the extramural aftercare. We're now going to be rolling out screening for everyone, because we've seen coaches abusing children instead of training them. So children are no longer safe anyway. And nobody at this point can be entrusted with the safety and protection of children. So we're now going to be screening everyone. And we know we are going to face a lot of resistance, but we have run out of options.
All right, I think, Honorable Minister, you've answered a lot of my questions in that last dialogue. But in summary, child protection is very broad. There's so many aspects of child protection that we should be looking at. There's the aspect of drug abuse, sexual abuse is one, and you mentioned gender violence. According to statistics, what would you say is of immediate concern in South Africa?
Teenage pregnancy. You see, when you become a parent as a child, that is already the beginning of our problems. But when you look at our HIV prevalence and the age group, you look at teenage pregnancy, you look at drugs, you look at alcohol abuse, you look at the issue of the way children interact, you look at the issue of the social media. If you put all those things together, gender-based violence as well, the statistics actually match, and they give us a reflection of why the abuse of children is so high.
Yeah.
Because all of these are high in South Africa, and all of that contributes to the abuse of children and the neglect of children. And that is why we're sitting where we are. Once we start addressing all of this, and we begin to reflect HIV prevalence, we reflect gender-based violence figures, we reflect the high prevalence of drug abuse, we will then be able to make a big dent in terms of restructuring our programs and trying to move in terms of protecting children. But it is very sad when a child gives birth to a child, because that is when the parenting breaks down, and that is when we are able, because we are able to raise a child that got that love, that attention, because that person that gave birth to that child is also still a child. And that man have the time that made them pregnant. It's a very old man, married with children somewhere, who are also unable to give that child the attention that they need. Then the granny is the one that is left with the child, but granny is old too, and granny cannot do that. So it's a very complicated aspect that requires us to intervene at different levels.
Okay.
All right.
Finally,
Minister.
before we let you go, Minister, Honorable Deputy Minister, I'd like to ask you how well supported is your program in terms of funding from the government? Can you give us an indication of how well it's funded, and how well trained are the facilitators in your program? Because that's key. When you step into a community, you want people who are well trained, who know how to immediately jump in and start running. And of course, there's the aspect of funding. We don't want you in a community on Monday and you're leaving on Thursday because of lack of funding. We want you there for the long haul, and that takes budget and that takes money. Are you well funded?
You will never be well funded on programs of children, because the dynamics is like a moving target. But yes, as the department, we do have funding that we've just presented our budget. So in our budget, we are the custodians of the rights of South Africa's children. We do have resources. They will never be enough, given the challenge and the epidemic, I would call it, of the child neglect and abuse that we are facing. But yes, we do have the resources. We need to acknowledge also that part of the struggles we have is our inability to absorb social workers. So we hoping that we'll get to a point where we'll have one social worker per ward, because then the social worker will be ensuring, supported by auxiliary social workers, they will be there. But yes, our social workers are trained. Those that we have managed to absorb, they are there, but the caseload is very high, and we have submitted the request for funding to enable us to absorb more social workers. Then we will make a bigger progress, because those that are there are far apart and far in between. So we need to move towards one social worker, one ward, and then we will be able to make real progress, not only on the protection of children, but on a lot of the social ills we are facing as South Africans.
All right. Deputy Minister, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And I'd like our viewers just to acknowledge that the Minister's hair is even green for the week, eh? You've really gone in for it. All right. Thank you very much for coming to join us on Afro Worldview. And we hope to be chatting to you soon about more initiatives. You know, our children really do need protection, and we're glad that you're taking this so very seriously. Thank you very much. Deputy Minister of Social Development, Hendrietta Bogopane Zulu, in studio with us. For now, though, let's take a short break. Do stay with us.